Hi everybody! Alright, let's see what happens in Mr. McBroom's wonderful 1-acre farm. So if you remember, they just figured out that his 1-acre farm is a pond 80 acres deep. It's all muddy. They called it a bog, and we learned what a bog was the other day. It was one of our words. It's just a really muddy place. So they were going to go take a swim since it's really hot. And as soon as they dived in, the water evaporated and it became really hard and they couldn't swim. And we talked about how Mr. McBroom uses a lot of non-literal language. So a lot of what he's saying isn't quite true, but it's to help you see and get an idea of what he means. But the moment I ran the topsoil through my fingers, my farmer's heart skipped a beat. That pond bottom felt as soft and as rich as black silk. "My dear Melissa," I called, "come look. This topsoil is so rich it ought to be kept in a bank." Now he just means rich in minerals and nutrients that help plants grow, not like in money. But again, non-literal language. I was in a sudden fever of excitement. That glorious topsoil seemed to cry out for seed. My dear Melissa had a sack of dried beans along, and I sent Will and Chester to fetch it. I saw no need to bother plowing the field. I directed Polly to draw a straight furrow with a stick and Tim to follow her, poking holes in the ground. Then I came along and I dropped a bean in each hole and stomped on it with my heel. Well, I had hardly gone a couple of yards when something green and leafy tangled my foot. I looked behind me, and there was a beanstalk traveling along in a hurry, looking for a pole to climb on. "Glory be!" I exclaimed. That topsoil was rich. The stalks were spreading all over. I had to rush along to keep ahead of them. So he's saying those beanstalks grew in like seconds. Again, not really true. If you have ever lived on a farm, or if your parents grow a garden, you know that it takes a couple of months, and at the least weeks for something to grow. So he's saying seconds, and he's saying the minerals and the nutrients in that ground is so rich that the plants grow so fast. By the time I got to the end of the furrow, the first stalk had blossomed, and the pods had formed, and they were already ready for picking. You can imagine our excitement. Will's ears wiggled, and Jill's eyes crossed, and Chester's nose twitched, and Hester's arms flapped, and Peter's missing front teeth whistled, and Tom stood on his head. "Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tom, Mary, Larry, and little Floretta," I shouted, "it's harvest time." Within an hour we had planted and harvested an entire crop of beans. But was it hot working in the sun? I sent Larry to find a good acorn along the road and we planted it, but it didn't grow near as fast as I had expected. We had to wait an entire 3 hours for the shade tree. Now, a tree like that would take years, maybe 30 years to grow and be big and tall enough for shade, but he's saying it took 3 hours. We made camp under our oak tree, and the next day we drove to Barnesville with our crop of beans. I traded it for various seeds and carrots and beets and cabbages and other items, and the storekeeper found the few kernels of corn that hadn't popped at the very bottom of the bin. So here they are. They're all under the oak tree. There they are playing. But we found out that corn was positively dangerous to plant. The stalks shot up so fast it would skin your nose. Of course, there was a secret to that topsoil. A government man came out and made a study in the matter. So he's saying that they came to figure out why the topsoil was so rich. And so a man from the government, like maybe FBI, came out to see. He said that there had once been a huge lake in that part of Iowa. It had taken thousands of years to shrink up to our pond, as you can imagine. The lake fish must have got packed in worse than sardines. There's nothing like fish to put nitrogen in the soil. That's a scientific fact. Nitrogen makes things grow to beat all, and we did occasionally turn up a fishbone. Now, when you learn about plant life cycles, you find out that nitrogen is really important to your soil. Your soil, water, sun, that is the most important thing. That's what the plant needs to feed and grow. So he's saying that all those fish that shrunk up from years and years of being in that pond made the soil rich with nitrogen, and that's why the plants go so fast. It's a stretch, but it is fun to think about. It wasn't long before Mr. Heck Jones came around to pay us a neighborly call. He was eating a raw turnip, and when he saw the way we were planting and harvesting cabbages, his eyes popped out of his head. It almost cost him his eyesight. He scurried away, muttering to himself. "My dear Melissa," I said, "that man is up to mischief." Folks in the town had told me that Mr. Heck Jones had the worst farmland in Iowa. He couldn't give it away. Tornado winds had carried off his topsoil and left a hairpin right on top. He had to plow it with wedges and sledgehammers. One day we heard a lot of booming on the other side of the hill, and my youngster went to see what was happening, and it turned out that he was planting seeds with a shotgun. Meanwhile, we went about our business on the farm. I don't mind saying that before long we were showing a handsome profit. The Bank of Connecticut, we had been lucky to harvest one crop a year. Now we were planting and harvesting 3 or 4 a day. And there were things we had to be careful about, though. Weeds, for one thing. My youngsters took turns standing weed guard, and the instant a weed popped out of the ground, they'd race to it and hoe it to death. You can imagine what would happen if weeds ever got going in a rich soil like ours. We also had to be careful about planting time. Once we planted lettuce just before my dear Melissa rang the noon bell for dinner. While we ate, the lettuce heads popped up and went to seed. We lost the whole crop. One day, back came Mr. Heck Jones with a grin. Doesn't sound good. His face had figured out a loophole in the deed that made the farm ours. "Hee-haw," he laughed. He was munching on a radish. "I got the best of you now, neighbor McBroom. The deed says you were to pay me everything in your purse, and you didn't." "Oh, contrary, sir," I answered. $10. There wasn't a cent more in my purse." "No, but there were 2 moths. Remember I told you those moths were going to be important. There were 2 moths in the purse. I seen 'em fluttering out. 3 milky white moths, McBroom. I want 3 milky white moths by 3 o'clock this afternoon, or I aim to take back the farm." Hee-haw! And off he went, laughing up his sleeve. Mama was just ringing the noon bell, so we didn't have much time. Confound that man! But he did have a legal point. "Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tom, Mary, Larry, and little Cloretta," I said, "we've got to catch 3 milky white moths. Hurry up now." We hurried in all directions, but moths are next to impossible to locate in the daytime. Try it yourself. Each of us came back empty-handed. My dear Melissa began to cry, for sure we were for sure to lose our farm, and I don't mind telling you that things looked dark. Dark! That was it! I sent the youngsters running down the road to a lonely pine tree and told them to rush back with a bushel of pine cones. Didn't we get busy, though? We planted a pine cone here and pine cone there every 3 feet, and they began to grow. We stood around anxiously, and I kept looking at my pocket watch, and I'll tell you about the watermelons in a minute. He always says that. Sure enough, by 10 minutes to 3, those cones had grown into a thick pine forest. It was dark inside. Not a ray of sunlight slipped through the green pine burrows. Deep in the forest I lit a lantern. Hardly a minute passed before I was surrounded by milky white moths. They thought it was night, and I caught 3 by the wing and rushed out of the forest, and there stood Mr. Heck Jones waiting with the sheriff to foreclose. Hee-haw, hee-haw, old Heck laughed. He was eating a apple. It's nigh on to 3 o'clock, and you can't catch moths in the daytime, so the farm is mine. Not so fast, Neighbor Jones, I said, with my hands cupped together. There's Mr. McBroom, Sheriff, and Mr. Heck Jones, long and skinny. Here's our 3 moths. Now skedaddle, sir, before your feet take root, and poison ivy grows out your ears. Boy, did he scurry away, muttering to himself. My dear Melissa, I said, that man is up to mischief. He'll be back. It took a good bit of work to clear the timber, I'll tell you. We had some of the pine milled and built ourselves a house on the corner of the farm. What was left we gave away to our neighbors. We were weeks blasting the roots out of the ground. And that's it for today. I hope you liked it.